So it's our third day in LA. Today's actually our shoot day. Kind of wanted to talk about Crown and how we came up with this song and how long we've been working on it. I think at this point in time, it's gonna be about a year, a bit under a year, like 10 months or something like that. So Crown started because, you know, we had been writing as of Duality, as of our album. And I was speaking with Mako, who's a good friend of ours. His name is Alex. And great artist, love all his music. And he was telling me how he writes his choruses. And because all his choruses are so fucking good, like incredibly good. And then he's like, I come up with like a hook or a theme, and then I kind of go from there and I flesh it out. And basically he was saying everything is way easier when we have a theme or a general message that you're trying to convey. So, which is kind of different from like the typical producer approach where it's very sound design intensive, like drum intensive, mix and engineering intensive. So we have been writing in this way for, I would say, the last, more or less the last year or two.
Yeah.
And then, and Alex tells me, so I do that, and then I kind of flesh out the rest of the song. And for some reason, I kind of had the phrase "king without a crown" in my head, and I was just replaying it over and over and over. And I started thinking about, okay, like how can I expand that? So who is someone that we could consider a king without a crown? And my head immediately goes to like religion and religious imagery, and because I find that, you know, faith-based beliefs tend to have a bigger emotional connotation and emotional response in listeners. And so I started thinking about, okay, what if the devil's a king without a crown? And then I started thinking about like cults, like sects, like all this occult type shit. Not that I'm into that. I was just like, how can I, you know, make this interesting?
People are going to be worried once they hear this shit.
I mean, yeah, they can be worried if they want. I mean, whatever. And so basically, it's a king without a crown, and then the devil. And I was like, okay, how can I expand that even further to something that is specific to me and Fury and like our experience as musicians? And, you know, at the time, and I would say we're like 6 years into this now, and we've in our walk in this industry, we've come across like many different kinds of people. And you know, during the time period that this was written, it was like mid-pandemic. And it was really hard to come across like positive thoughts in the pandemic. It was like everything was pretty rough. And so I started thinking about, you know, artists who, you know, have to compromise on some sort of like their integrity or, you know, different aspects of their creativity to cater to like what is popular, what the media wants, what, you know, algorithms want. And so I started thinking about, you know, what happens when, you know, all these artists become successful, like we pedestalize them and society like basically worships these people. And so I try to figure out how to tie in that concept with the king without a crown hook. And then I came up with the idea of like, you know, maybe like this is the price we pay as musicians, is like we have to sacrifice certain things. With that comes, you know, having to learn social media, having to fucking get involved with these algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, if that is the case and society does pedestalize us and treat us like we're royalty, then the devil's a king without a crown. So that's kind of how the chorus happened. And this was all literally within like 2 hours. I was like, yo, I got something. I remember doing like the first chorus like that, and it was a really bad melody. And so I was like, typically when I write is like I either come up with a chorus that's catchy and then I'm kind of helpless after that, or I'll come up with a verse that's catchy or a bridge and then I'm helpless after that. We hate pre-choruses. Well, we don't hate, but it's like, it's not our strength. So yeah, and then I was like, okay, this is cool. How can we expand this further? I sent it to Stu. And you were like, yo, this is really weird.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting kind of digging through the bones of the project after you sent it to me. You had all these weird sounds used in very different places. Like, I think your sort of 808 main kick drum thing was actually just a bass.
Was there no drum?
It was like a cut of a bass sample.
I don't remember that.
And I was like, wow, this is really weird, but it sounds cool. And then, so I started working with that. And
yeah, and the 808 was actually like a Reese that I was like modulating the formant shift.
Yeah.
So it was like boom, boom. It was really cool. And all that was just like experimenting. So, you know, back to both this and the writing side, it's like, I started thinking about why, as producers, are we restricting ourselves to like, you know, if you want to talk about lyricism, it's like, why is it always like heartbreak and sadness and like romance and stuff like that, when as humans we have this spectrum of emotions, and I would say there's so many other emotions that can be just as powerful as that. And for this Crown song specifically, it was like, I think there was a bit of like resentment, and how like there's so many artists who, in my opinion, like compromise on artistry and all this, and they still get what is considered like clout, I guess. And so the song just became a commentary on that. There's no positive like message in the song itself. But it still tells a story. And so that's kind of where my head was at, is like, you don't have to necessarily write about what everyone else writes about if something else is true to yourself. And to that same point with production, it's like you can experiment with other stuff that is not meant to be used in a certain way, because you don't know how it's gonna come out, and it turned out really cool. So, and because I started writing this way, it fleshed out a whole EP that it's like literally about so many like fucked up different things. And I found that really exciting, because looking back on our catalog, I think the songs that have that edge, and that also is reflected in streams, although I don't really give a shit about streams, but it's like a cool comparison.
Yeah.
Stuff like Demons, Nightmares, like Echoes, like all these songs that explore pretty dark, even sad stories, like about anxiety, and it's a melodic song.
Yeah.
So it's both a mix of like being able to do stuff that is out of pocket and maybe will be considered contrarian to what everyone's doing, but doing it tactfully in a way that it still sounds good. So once we had the chorus and the verse sort of fleshed out, I hit up Kyle Reynolds and Jordan Tariff, who are two really good co-writer friends of ours. It's interesting because once you co-write more and more, you kind of know who can help you like bring out aspects of a track in different ways. So if I want to write about certain things, I'll hit up certain people. And in this case, Kyle came in and just completely changed the melody of the chorus and made it 1,000,000 times better. Like he just came in and said, hey, we can make this way catchier. And literally in that same session, I think I have a Zoom recording of the whole session. He just changed the entire song. And then Jordan helped us with the verse. Initially we had, lines that were a bit too specific to like this era. It was like stuff like looking at our phones and very specific lyrics like that. And we just simplified it to what we're trying to say without necessarily saying it. And so after we had like the verse and the chorus kind of revised, we started thinking about, who we wanted for vocals kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we looked on, I spent an unhealthy amount on TikTok, a healthy amount of time. And I followed Grandson, and I saw Grandson did a duet like reacting to a vocalist called Brassy's TikTok. And it was a really cool song. And the lyricism in that song was also amazing. And I was like, okay, this person is very talented. And oftentimes when we're trying to find singers, we try to look for people who have really good songwriting and similar taste, because as producers, I feel like oftentimes people just reach out, pay someone a big fee, and then they get a top line back. But what happens there is like, you're not really telling your story a lot of times. Like as a producer, if you're releasing tracks about heartbreak every other week, you're not getting your heart broken every other week.
You might be.
You might be, but you're not like falling in love and that's unhealthy. Like it's just not reality. Like someone is going to listen to your songs and be like, are you actually breaking up every other week? Like this is ridiculous. But if you look at other genres like rock or like, I think hip hop's a great example when people rap about like, crimes and stuff that they've done, and some of these people are living that life, and that transparency I think is what creates community. And so in this case, I loved the lyrics that she had, and it was very similar to the stuff that I wrote on Crown. And so what initially we were thinking about having male vocalists, I was like, what if we send the demo to Brassy and we see if she's down? And she loved it and she was down. And so we went back and forth a bunch, and it ended up changing completely. Initially the song had like a very guttural corpse kind of verse. It was still like very rhythmic and almost monotone, but it just sounded completely different. And then she came in and just changed it entirely. And so after that, it just became like a production challenge of how to make it all sound like one song.
Yeah, bringing it all together, because we had all these different sections that sounded quite different. And as we sort of started locking in the vocalists and the performances from different people, it was, we had to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to tie all these elements together? And we had sort of the bones of it, and we ended up leaning a lot more heavily into the guitar. So we have in the verse, we have this like really low, crunchy guitar. And then as we get into the chorus with Kyle, it kind of opens up into a more melodic, wider, layered guitar.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of helps mimic the energy of the vocalists as well.
Yeah, and if you guys literally run like a stereo imager on it, you'll see like the verse guitar is like significantly more mono and centered than we go chorus, and it's way more energetic and wide. And initially, yeah, it felt like it was almost like two songs into one. So we played with a bunch of different arrangements and stuff, but at the end, it ended up being that guitar and keeping some iteration of the initial chug going into pre and chorus that ended up connecting it all. And I think another thing we did with this song was having a really extreme, like less is more approach, where initially we were thinking about, what if we do 3 choruses, add a bridge, something like that. But the message that the song tells, or the story that it tells, like we were like, will it change? Does it add anything here if we change the arrangement? And it turned out that just keeping the song short and concise did what it had to do. The song did what it had to do. And so we started thinking, any change that we made, does it make the song better? If not, does it keep the song neutral? And if it did keep the song neutral, aka if it made no change, then it's actually a bad thing, because you want every change that you make to actually add to the song. Right, so we took a very much less is more approach, and yeah, it just got to the point where we were like, I don't think there's any change we can make here that would kind of make it better. And we've been very, I would say, transparent with each other, because otherwise you just get into this like perfectionist, like I'm just gonna iterate forever, and you just end up not releasing the song. And we've been victims to that like a fair amount of times.
Yeah.
And so in this case, it was like, okay, we have a sick verse, Kyle's chorus is great, figure out the drop. The drop was really interesting because we had to figure out how to have vocal presence and like the mix in the verse and still fit like a heavy drop with like a lead and not lose like dynamics.
One of the biggest challenges was keeping the drums punchy in the drop relative to these big, heavy 808 basses, super grungy. And we went back and forth on this a bunch because I kept kind of messing it up. I was like, oh, the levels of this too high, levels of this too high. And I was like, yeah, man, it's like tough to find the right middle ground where the drums are still cutting through, but not too much. And yeah, overall, it was a really cool track to work on, and definitely, gave us a different perspective on how to approach this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think to that same point, like when we were approaching this in this like contrarian way, both like production and songwriting wise, I also started thinking about, what does imagery look like for this song? And because it was so ambiguous as far as messaging, like, yes, we're talking about King Without a Crown, but then you add the devil, you add like the whole societal element to it, and it really can be interpreted in whichever way. And so I started thinking about when it comes to visual and music video, there was an extra layer of depth that we could add with that extra creative. And so we started thinking about, what does that look like with a music video? How are we gonna do this? So I think one of the biggest takeaways for both ourselves and anyone who's watching that's a creative is it's okay to actually focus on stuff that you think is interesting, not necessarily what everyone else is doing because it streams well or whatever, because the odds are is what makes you interesting is what people are going to connect with. So, initially I would beat myself up because, hey, my production wasn't as good as like all these other EDM producers, my sound design, it's okay, but it wasn't like anything incredible. And then I started writing, and it was like all these songs started connecting with our fans, and you look on Spotify and we have co-writing on pretty much all the top tracks. And those were all really dark songs. And I started thinking about Fury, and really it's not even about being furious or writing about fucked up shit. It's just like, just be true to yourself. So whatever that may be, in this case, it's like we were going through a fucking pandemic. Stuff was really dark mentally, and unfortunately it was impossible to write anything positive. Like, we're way better now, I would say, but I think that's for a lot of artists as well. Like the past couple of years have been really hard. And if you can write that from a place of genuineness, like there's frankly no way that I could have written anything positive during the last 2 years. But if you can do that from a place of genuineness, like don't be scared to do stuff that's out of pocket. And the odds are is that that's what's going to give you your edge and connect with more people.